Hello and welcome to week 4 of our English composition class. This week's a very exciting week because you're going to be working on your compare and contrast essay, the first essay of the semester. It asks you to take a similar item that's changed over time and compare and contrast the different models of it. The assignment is based off of an essay by Wendell Berry called A Good Scythe. You can see that in the week 4 content. In that essay, he compares an old school hand scythe or scythe, I always say that word wrong, a pole with a curved blade that you swing back and forth and take down weeds, tall grasses. He compares that with a gas-powered weed whacker. And he comes up with a number of interesting ideas. Remember, with compare and contrast, you have a couple different models. You have point by point and subject by subject. So as you're reading Good Scythe, ask yourself, which version is he doing? Is he keeping the two things separate and then comparing them at the end? Or is he using the categories of comparison and going back and forth? Also, look at his introduction and his conclusion. Part of the essay for this week is you're going to be creating an engaging introduction. Remember all those introduction strategies we talked about: an anecdote, a current news story, a fact or statistic, a quote. Depending on what items you're using, I'm sure you could find something really interesting to engage the reader with when you start the essay. You want to post your thesis in that first paragraph right at the end. The thesis is going to state the topic of the essay, and it's going to identify what the purpose and author stance of the essay is. Finally, with the thesis statement, and I'm going to be working more and more with you this semester on this, look to use that thesis statement to help preview the supporting paragraph topics. Now, for example, let's say I was going to compare a film camera to a digital camera. And I want to look at the cost of these things. I want to use at user friendliness. Are they easy to use for the photographer? And I want to look at the quality of the prints. If those are the three things that I'm going to be talking about in comparing and contrasting a film camera and a digital camera, I'm going to preview those topics in the thesis statement. A traditional film camera and a digital camera have many things in common, but where they differ is in terms of user friendliness, in terms of quality of the print, and in terms of cost. And however I list those in the thesis statement, that's how I'm going to go in the order of my essay. It's just a great way to preview the argument for the reader, to almost outline where you're going to go. And to be honest with you, as a writer, sometimes it keeps me in my boxes. Oh yeah, I got to talk about user feasibility. Oh yeah, I have to talk about cost. Oh yes, I have to talk about the cost of prints. So just think about doing that with your thesis statement. That's the introduction. Your body paragraphs will be support. You're going to be either using subject by subject or point by point. And then for the conclusion, you can do a summary. You can bring it back to the introduction. Let's say you started with a news story. Maybe you finished by discussing that news story. Finally, you can always leave the reader with a new way of thinking about things, thinking about the topic that you wrote about. Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, did this in 2 Ways to See a River. He was comparing his experience as a steamboat captain, how it was the first year when everything was beautiful and the sunset was glorious and the log in the river was fun to look at, with how he felt about those things 10 years later. The sunset meant a storm was coming. The log in the river could tear apart the boat. He had lost the romance of the job because of knowing it so well and learning it so well. And then at the end, instead of summarizing that, because he's a great writer, he came up with an analogy. He used the doctor analogy. And he posed the question, if you're a doctor, can you ever look at a woman who's blushing and think of beauty? Or do you think of, that must be a sign that she's ill, or that she's going to become very sick very soon? Can you ever step outside of that doctor role once you've learned it so well? Great way to end that essay. Think about a good way to end your essay. Now, besides that, I want to talk a little bit here about document design and transitions. Transitions are words that writers use to help the reader understand their ideas and to move through the ideas smoothly. let's see here. Oh, it's a word or a phrase, and it creates relationships between ideas. It's used to relate ideas. There's 3 different types. This information is in the chapter about transitions in your textbook. First of all, you have transitional expressions. These are the most common. They're the easiest to use. They usually come at the beginning of sentences, and they just, again, point to relationships, but also move the ideas along. Ones that you might use for compare and contrast are, for example, additionally, in contrast, in comparison, little phrases you put at the beginning of sentences that help move your ideas further. Here's an example. There are many advantages to booking a flight ticket well before a trip. Seat selection, row choice, and layovers all can be negotiated easily if a ticket is bought months in advance. On the other hand, booking a ticket closer to departure date might mean a better ticket price. On the other hand, sets up that contrasting relationship. It gets us from the idea of all these things about airlines to the fact that if you book a ticket late, you might get a better deal. Think about what transitions you can use. This is just one example, but there are a lot of others. Another type of transition is a repeated keyword. If you want the reader to remember a certain term or a certain part of what you're talking about, use it a couple times. You repeat key terms throughout the essay to better focus the reader's attention. For example, transitional expression help writers move smoothly from one idea to the next. There are different types, different expressions for different modes of essay writing. Besides transitional expressions, there are 2 other important ways to make transitions. Right here, my friend. Great transitional phrase. Besides transitional expressions. I'm going from that idea of transitional expressions to the other 2 ways to make transitions. Think about the keywords in your essay, maybe 1 or 2 that you want the reader to remember, and try wrapping it into a transitional phrase. Finally, we've got pronouns. And pronouns are used to substitute for names of things. They help with repetition. He, she, it, we, they. For example, Jim went to the concert where he heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Afterwards, Jim bought a recording of the Ninth Symphony. If you don't want to use Jim here, you could, of course, use he. Jim went to the concert where he heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Afterward, which is a good transition. It's a time transition. He bought a recording of the Ninth Symphony. So think about these transition types when you're writing. It elevates your writing, makes it a little more professional. It's an easy thing to put into your writing. And look for the different types of transitions in the textbook in the transition chapter. Alright, finally, my friends, I want to share with you what your document should look like. This isn't just for an essay. This could be for any assignment. It's a pretty standard heading and a pretty standard document design for MLA. So you're going to have your name at the top, the teacher's name, the class title, and the date. They used a header here with the student's last name and page number. I'm not requiring that. Some people use that, some people don't. It's a pretty easy thing to insert into a Word document. We have our title centered, and then our paragraphs indented 5 spaces. You can use the tab button to do that. Finally, at the bottom here, we have an example of an outside source. We're not using outside sources yet, but if you're using a quote and it's longer than 4 lines, you're going to separate it from the paragraph and make it more narrow than the paragraph with the margins. You're going to use standard margins, double space, 12 font, and I usually recommend using Times New Roman or Arial for your font. Those are pretty standard academic fonts. But the real important thing is just this heading, I would say. Make sure you got your name, your teacher's name, class, and the date. And this isn't just for the teacher to look at. This is if you go back to your essays years afterwards, which we all do, right? We all sit around and get out our old essays and read them. You can know which class you were in when you wrote this thing and who it was for and all that wonderful stuff. All right, that's what I got for you today. Transitions and document design. Good luck with your essay. I'm going to get you some feedback on your discussion by Wednesday so you have some ideas from me about what your writing topic is. If you've got any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out, and I'll be talking to you next week when we start a different mode of essay writing.